Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. In our house today, Fatu Kaba. Fatu, it's great to see you. A short bio, and then we're going to get right into it. Fatu is a Liberian peace activist, a storyteller, an author, an entrepreneur who is dedicated to empowering young leaders through storytelling, personal development, and social justice. Fatu was born in Liberia's civil war. She began her activism over a decade ago as a youth radio talk show host, engaging young voices through programs with the Liberian Red Cross and UNMIL Radio. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Peace Studies and Conflict Resolution degree with research linking poverty, education, and violence. In 2022, Fatu moved to Canada, earning her Master's in Technology, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation from the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which was to further her mission of social change through entrepreneurial education. Fatu is the visionary behind Heart's Global Network and Fatu M initiatives that amplify marginalized voices, especially those of women and children, by championing education, entrepreneurship, and of course, storytelling. She connects diverse communities, creating spaces for dialogue, mentorship, and growth. Her work is fantastic in social justice and the storytelling. It's earned her Peacemaker Award, and she's been featured in places like CTV and Empowering Humanity magazine. She's also spoken on the TEDx stage. Her vision is to create a world where every woman is empowered to embrace their unique identity, confidently sharing their story and driving positive change toward a peaceful and equitable society. Fatu, it's so good to have you here. I'm so keen to dive in and dig into a few of these pieces to your wonderful story so far. You're so young. But I wanted to start with first is the journey. I mean, I don't know anyone that was born in Liberia's civil war, and out of that, you became a peace activist and an entrepreneur. I mean, the story itself is extraordinary. So, in sort of a nutshell, tell us a bit about the journey of being born into a war, what happened to you, and ultimately, kind of like some of the experiences before you get to Canada. Just what's it like for people to understand being born into a civil war like that in Liberia?
For the most part, it's not fun. So I was pretty young during the Civil War, and I have like ideas of very graphic memories that occurred during the Civil War, and especially the last outbreak of the Civil War, which was in 2003. I remember my family and I basically ran to a temporary refugee camp that was hosted by the United States government. Yeah, the the United States Embassy in Liberia. We basically slept out for like a whole night, and the only thing we're thinking about, my God, the next bullet is coming for, like the next rocket is coming for us. It was a pretty scary experience. Lost some family members. There were times where you just like having conversation with someone. I know my mom friend visited us like a day before, and after like a few days, like they told her like a rocket has taken she and her entire family in their homes. And so it was basically like walking on like pins and needles every single day. So after the Civil War, there was a lot of trauma, like of course, everybody's like having trauma, and one of the way to process this trauma was through conversations. And sometimes we just like have like this cycle where we just like sit down and talk all night. And I'll listen to sometimes my mom just talking about her own experience because we're on the refugee camp, but sometimes they had to like leave the camp to go out to actually find food for us. And they different traumas that occurred during that process. It wasn't really like fun. And even after the Civil War, we're still having conversation around it. We still experience a lot of issues with riots and mass violence. Around about a year or two after the Civil War, we had another conflict that broke out. It was in on the scale of the Civil War, but was bad enough for the president to call a state of emergency,
Mm.
because there was a lot of religious divide, there was a lot of cultural divide, and my high school got burned down basically as a result of that cultural religious conflict. So it was basically just like being in a society where everyone is traumatized and nobody know how to actually process that trauma, and then being using violence as an outlet for that trauma. So it was kind of always being sensitive to certain issues because anything could go wrong, like anything could lead to like another riot or another violence. And so yeah, that was like a very huge factor for me growing up. And another factor for me growing up was also uh being in a community where girls' education wasn't prioritized. So for our people, it was they're very like a woman is supposed to be in the kitchen, a woman's role is this, a woman's role is that. And I don't know how I became very rebellious at a very early age, but I just became like, nah, I don't want this. And I think that was reinforced after my mom left her marriage with my dad. She was like the third wife. So he was basically a polygamous marriage, and he had three other women, actually three plus two plus my mom, three. And so I have a lot of older sisters who basically did not go to school, including my mom. She got married at the age of 13. And so
Wow.
there was like it was a bit too common for girls to get married early. And so after my mom left the marriage and she moved, I'm saying that because she moved to a new environment where now we had women who were going to school, who were doing something different. And she saw that just like, I want my girls to do this. And so for us early age, we started interacting with different people and also got in touch with the Liberian Red Cross, where I became the leader of my campus girls unit. And we do a lot of like conversations around women's rights, gender roles. And a good thing about that also was that Libra also elected the first female president. She was actually the first female head of state in Africa. And so now transitioning from the Civil War and becoming the first female head of state wasn't an easy task for her, but for us young girls growing up in this very same society and seeing what she's gone through and now taking like the highest office in the country, that gave us like a lot of hope that
Mm.
we can also do something differently and we can do something better. And so very early, I became very passionate about social justice. I had a lot of experience where people would just tell me how to act like a guy, And so I started doing my own research and things, and then I became a debater because I just wanted to argue back.
Well, I have a lot of maxims and adages that I tend to use and live by, in fact, in some of my writing and whatever I do. One of them is this: our lives shape our work. Nevertheless, our work shapes us. And
I
so
agree.
for me, Fatu, one thing I've noticed about you in your journey is that from the Civil War, from the refugee camps, from your family, from leaving Liberia to immigrating to Canada, in addition to a bunch of other things that you've done, you are ultimately a peace builder. You are someone who's interested in using stories and storytelling to help resolve conflict, to help build up equanimity, to help build up equality, to help build up diversity, to help women and children succeed. So, what I wanted to ask you a bit about was how has that prior experience of your life shaped you into the both woman and professional that you are today?
Actually, everything I do is basically from those experiences. Like I said, I'm very passionate about social justice, and if we right now, Hearts Global Network is based on social justice and peace building. And the goal, like you said earlier, also is to use peace to build education entrepreneurship. So after I left Liberia, I moved to the United States. I got a scholarship to study in the United States. And as part of that, I studied peace studies.
Mm.
And as part of the peace studies was wanting to answer some questions around violence and education. So I published my thesis. And the goal of that thesis was to understand the relationship between violence, education, and poverty and how they influence each other and how we will provide access to educational opportunity. Not only are we reducing people's poverty level, but we are also reducing their likelihood to engage in violence because sometimes most violence comes from anger and pent up frustration. So, which also based on our life, the amount of poverty we experience. And so when we provide access to resources like education and entrepreneurship, we providing means for people to be able to one, become entrepreneurs of their own, like me, or you could choose to just get a job or like have like a different living environment for yourself, which takes away some of the frustration that comes with not having options. So when I published that thesis, there was a lot of question of, okay, I know I can use education to make a difference, but how can I use education? And so I decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur because for me, an entrepreneur is someone who sees a problem, organize resources and solve the problem. And
Mm.
that's why I came to Canada and I did my master's in entrepreneurship. And so my entire work has been basically influenced by the things that I experienced. And one thing that I've also found very fascinating is that as a storyteller, when I put myself out there, sometimes I think, oh, I'm the only person putting myself out there. But then I realize that there are just so many other people that have like so much going on that vulnerability is powerful. People think vulnerability is supposed to be look like a weakness, but it's very powerful in leadership because it allows for empathy and people to relate to you and to be able to open up to you and talk to you. So that's basically has been my whole work around using my story, my experience to empower other people.
So what is it these days that you're doing? I want the listener and the viewers to sort of understand. I mean, here's someone who has escaped effectively both war and camps, and then through all of your different siblings that maybe didn't escape and have not had 2 degrees like you have already. Tell me a bit about what it is that you're doing in terms of community, of peace building, of storytelling, of entrepreneurship.
We're doing a lot of things, especially through Hearts. So personally, before Hearts, I write novels. I write a lot of novels that are based on personal experiences of some of the things, but sometimes they're not my own story. They are stories of people I saw growing up. Like I have a book called Harder Choices, and it's basically based off of the life experience of women who didn't have other options, or sometimes they had like options, but um, their family didn't give them much choice to make like better option, choose the best of those options. And so, and the goal is to tell these women that we see you, we hear your story, and although you've gone through this, you don't have to feel like nobody else sees and acknowledge your story. So that's one of the things I do. On my own personal level as a writer. And another thing I do for Hearts, we do a lot of programs. Like right now, we are about to launch the WE initiative, is the Women Education and Entrepreneurship Initiative. And the goal of that program basically is to provide capacity building training and mentorship to women in Africa who got married early or who are like single mothers or breadwinners of their family, and they just get cut out of workforce because if you get married at the age of 13, 14, 15, sometimes you don't have like other options, right? And
Mm.
sometimes even if you want to be an entrepreneur or you want to go back to school or get into the workforce, it's very hard. So how can we get them back into the workforce, which also help them and their children because that's contributing directly to reducing their poverty. We also do peace conferences. We have a peace conference coming up in April, and the goal of this conference, here in Nova Scotia, Canada. And the goal of this conference is to bring together thought leaders from different parts of Canada, eventually globally, that we can get together and have conversations around holistic peace. Because sometimes when people talk about peace, they're only thinking about violence that are far away. But when I talk about the day-to-day life experience of people, gender-based violence, mental health, career and entrepreneurship, to get together and say, these are all part of peace and we should all get together and have conversations around it. We do a lot of different programs, but I'll just like keep it to those ones for now.
Well, you do. I mean, it's a really credible point you're making, which is you are continuously trying, it seems, to amplify the voice of marginalized people, and whether that's women, children, people of color, other identities, etc. So, I guess what I want to hear from you as well, from a leadership perspective, putting your leadership hat on for a second, what are some of those, I guess, systemic barriers that seem to still stand in the way of progress, of change, of helping those who are marginalized rise up and feel equal to those that are not marginalized?
That's a very heavy question, That's a very heavy question. I think one of the things I've experienced or I've seen is most of the time, especially people of color, are called into spaces where it's more performative
Mhm.
than actually meant for change. So, for example, inviting a Black or an Indigenous person to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion or truth and reconciliation, people forget that these are very heavy topics. They are not feel-good topics. And when you're talking about DEI, it's meant for us to go deeper into what's like at the surface. Sorry, what at the bottom of the situation for us to be able to clarify some things. But people get invited now to some of these conversations, and the people organizing it are not ready for deeper conversations.
Mm.
And so people from marginalized communities are unable to really say their truth because they are scared that if I really say my truth, I'm going to have to be calling people out for their actions. And if people are not willing to take accountability for their actions, I'm in a system that is not built for me. And so I could basically get blacklisted, So people are afraid of speaking up because the power is not designed in a way that accommodates everybody. And that has been one of the major problems. I did a couple of research with a couple of companies. It was some part of last year. And I noticed that a lot of people are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they were not actually inviting people who have experienced those different issues. For example, um, having a conversation about indigenous rights when the people that are on the table don't really have like the indigenous experience of what it actually means to live in Canada. And when I talk to people who've actually lived on reserve or who families have lived on reserve or who've actually gone through that, those are some of the concerns from them because they were like, everybody tell us to speak on the indigenous experience, but nobody actually want to hear the experience. They don't want to hear like the good things. And when we say the bad things, then it becomes like we're being very radical or we are insensitive or we are trying to cause trouble. So being able to get away from that has been a serious issue.
Mm. Well, then there's two ways to look at that, right? So there's the individual side, which is someone who's been asked to be in that situation to speak to or rise up and bring truth to power, if you will, right? So there's the individual side, but then there's the other side, which is the organization or the leader who is blind, I shall say, right? Sort of not being more performative and sort of just saying, "Hey, let's check the box." So I guess let's tackle that. I mean, they're two heavy questions ultimately, but let's go back to the leader and the organization, come back to the individual. So from a leadership and an organizational perspective, if a non-BIPOC or sort of some individual that is, let's just say, white middle age is looking to check the box, obviously that's wrong. But there's probably other guidance that you could give these types of leaders in order to fuel a more productive and harmonious opportunity to exchange, to understand, to empathize. So, what would you suggest, and what have you suggested from a leadership perspective for those types of organizations and leaders?
So I first like to start with like self-reflection because it goes to like being able to reflect on yourself. It's to tell, especially people in leadership position, to reflect on themselves.
Mm,
If you are maybe having an event or you're trying to do a project where you want to like just check the box. I sometimes write articles where I just say this is what you could do to self-reflect, ask yourself, why am I inviting them if I was not going to do any kind of report. This wasn't going to go in our annual report, our social media, or to our donors for any kind of credit. Would I still be inviting these people to my event or to take part in my project? That will help you first be able to understand whether your intentions are actually to support marginalized communities or whether it's just there like, to check the box. But outside of that, is to advise leaders, people who are in position of decision making, to actually do a lot of like subconscious bias trainings. There
yeah.
are a lot of like organizations that provide subconscious bias trainings. Sometimes when organizations take part in subconscious bias training, they send regular employees who don't have a lot of decision making powers. So sending like the manager or like the supervisor to actually be the one to attend will make a lot of difference because when they are like the one managing people, they also able to like set those expectations around safety and DEI for those they manage instead of just sending a regular employee who is only there for their 9 to 5. I mean, they do make a lot of difference, but that also have to do with like the top up. So there are a couple of obviously things that can be done. And another one is if you are doing a project, for example, you want to do a project for, let's say, the Black community, invite a Black person to be on the team, invite a Black person to be in a position where they have a lot of say and they're not just there to like, I think it's good, or I think this is what the Black community need. You don't know what the Black community need, trust me. So reach out to them and say, hey, what do you need? And how can I help you? And instead of doing the work for them, there's this thing where you say, teach a person to fish, but don't fish for them. So give them the resources, ask them what they want, and let them do the work instead of you hiring like consultants who are not affiliated with this community to do the work.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you, Fatu. So, and then the flip side is an individual who is of color or marginalized. How do we find ways in which to ensure that they feel safe to speak up, to rise up, to ultimately bring their truths to a discussion so that others that are not marginalized can can hear and see and feel what actually is happening?
So that's a very interesting one, and that's one of the things I've been able to do with Hearts, and it's been going really well. Is first off having conversation with people behind the scene and saying, "Hey, this is the platform. I do it on my podcast, and I'm also doing it for our peace conference. We have conversation. I say, I am not going to tell you what to say, as long as it's within safety for yourself and the people that are here, but it doesn't have to be comfortable. I always make it clear you don't have to feel like you have to, because growth comes with discomfort. And like I said, these are heavy topics that sometimes require discomfort. So I just talk to them one-on-one and make them feel like, okay, I got your back. And I just want you to be you and share your life experience and tell us what can work for you. Like for the Peace Conference, we have a panel session as part of the conference called Truth and Reconciliation for African and Indigenous Community and what it means for them. And so this is not just truth and reconciliation, but what does it mean for you and your community? That's what
Yeah.
we are looking at. And so we have people who are from the who are African Nova Scotian who done a lot of research, studies, understanding in these areas, and then we bring them together. And the only thing I ever told our moderator, like just talk to them, make them feel safe, make them feel like they can share their experiences, their thoughts, and their recommendations. without feeling like we have to feed them words. So we're not feeding anybody words. We're gonna let you go and be yourself and just have like a nice chat and take away some of like the formal structure from around it. So people can just like feel comfortable talking.
I love that. I love
So
that. So for
thanks.
so for people who are listening or watching then, and they want to make a difference, and whether they're an individual that has been marginalized, or they're a leader of power of some sort in the hierarchical change, they want to make a difference in their community or their organization or both. What's the one piece of advice that you can share about leadership, purpose, change, action that actually resonates, that helps these people, like, I guess, beat down the door and actually open it to do something different?
So it depends on who talking about. So
Yeah.
I just give it from both sides. If you are a person who is not from the marginalized community, but you want to like help or you want to be part of like the solution. So I once did like a social media post on Black hair in Canada because there's a lot of trauma associated with being a Black person and having like the natural falsy hair. And I have this person who was in my circle. She saw the video, just like, how can I make Black people feel comfortable in their own hair? And I appreciated her question. So questions like that give a lot of room for conversations, but also put her in the space for her to be able to learn and to be able to make a difference. So that's one way to go about it. And for people of color who are looking to make a difference, I would say first, we have to look at trying to get a community where we can talk to, um, whether that being trying to get like a therapy session to be able to process our own trauma. Because if you're doing work like this, you're going to do for a lot of trauma, either your own trauma or other people's trauma, to be able to heal from that so that it takes away some of like your own heavy load. And reach out to people who are not necessarily like you, people who are different from you in terms of race, religion, sexuality, and have conversation with them. Not everybody's gonna be open to you, but there are gonna be people who want to make a difference. And diversity includes all of us. It includes all of us coming together and working together, so we can exclude them. And from the leadership side of things, I would just tell people be open-minded and do it. Like that's basically it. Just be open-minded, be willing to learn, and just like do the things you want to do.
And do you have an example where it gives you hope because you've seen either an organization or a community change for the good, where, in hindsight, if you look back and you said, wow, that was terrible, like that leader or that organization or that society, whatever it is, it was like there was a block there. And then you, whether you directly are involved or maybe it's an indirect example, you can help us understand it's possible. Here's what happens afterwards when good people put their minds and hearts to change.
I feel like I could think about a couple of examples, but like not necessarily where I'm directly involved. Um, Let me think about this one a little bit and give them the most appropriate one.
No worries.
I'll say the Liberian Women Peace Movement. I don't know if you've heard about the Liberian Women Peace
No,
Movement.
tell me more.
Okay, so during the Civil War, these were a group of women who came together and they said, we are done with the long civil war and we want a peace. So women from the market space, women who were journalists, just just think about it, from religion, everything. They came together and they staged mass protests, peaceful protests, of course, that they were done with the civil war and they wanted change. And because they came together, and some of the story also say they did a lot of sex strike. Like, we're not having sex with the men until they decided to do something about it. And
Wow.
yes, when they really came together was when we saw like the mass change in that. But another example would be just like growing up in Liberia and seeing a female president. Like I said, when some of us were very young, we had our older sisters who were only looking forward to marriage. But eventually, when we saw like women becoming cabinet minister, women becoming members of the parliament, women in different spaces in the government, we also started joining in. We knew we could be part of those women and we wanted to make a difference. But on a far off example would be Mame Yunus. I don't know if you've heard about Mame Yunus.
Oh,
He won a Nobel Peace Prize basically by providing macro loans to women entrepreneurs in Bangladesh. Yes, I'm sure it's Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, where he did a lot of like loaning women money because he believed women can make a lot of difference when they are given the opportunity and resources. So he provided like a lot of macro loans to these women, and it's really helped the economy. And he eventually won a Nobel Peace Prize for it. So there are a lot of examples of where when people come together or people just become representative of certain things, we see a lot of difference. I hope that answers your
that's
question.
amazing. No, thank you for all of those. Okay. So the last line of questioning I wanted to get into, Fatu, is I mean, you're an extraordinary human being, a leader with prowess when it comes to raising and amplifying the voices of those that have been marginalized, be they people of color, different identities, women, children, etc. But you yourself have gone through an extraordinary evolution in your short life from, as mentioned, the civil war in Liberia to having to live in refugee camps to emigrating to America to emigrating to Canada. What has it been like, first of all, I suppose, right, from leaving Liberia, your home country, and watching it dissolve in essence, but finding a way back eventually after the Civil War to being in America and to being in Canada. I mean, as an immigrant, I'm not certain if it's been easy, hard, middle of the road, but you've had a bunch of things to go through as well. I'm certain of that. So let us understand a little bit of you, how you are, and in these chasms, like these changes that you've had to endure. I'm sure the listener and the viewer would love to know a little bit about how you are.
I am doing okay. But initially it wasn't easy. It was hard for me. Transitioning from the US to Canada wasn't crazy because um there were a couple of cultural shocks, but a lot of things were the same. But transitioning from Liberia to the US was crazy. There was a lot of cultural shock. I was basically like barely 18, moving to a whole new country, being the only girl, no family member, anything, and then going to college. And I had a lot of experience with PTSD when I got to the US. So when I first started, I even mentioned it in my TEDx talk how I basically experienced a lot of PTSD that was not favorable for me.
Mhm.
But I was very lucky. I was very fortunate that I had a community around me. When I went to the US, I had my professors that I could talk to. Um, the couple professor who watched me cry in the office
No.
or just basically break down in the office. But they were also like some of these professors that, for example, during COVID, I lost my scholarship in the US. I was kind of getting rough and I knew I was going to lose my scholarship. And I felt comfortable enough to contact my professors. And I like, you know what? Here is the deal. I'm either going to graduate college, I'm going to drop out of college and go back to Liberia. So we can basically combine my junior and senior year into one and take all my classes in 1 year so I can graduate. And my professors were like, that's crazy, but let's make it happen. And so they were able to help me get some internships that subsidize some of my credits to allow me to graduate in 3 years.
Wow.
So I was fortunate to have a community. And even after I came to Canada, I think one of the things that made me very comfortable starting a business less than 2 years in Canada was having a community. And that also have to do with being able to talk to people. So therapy was very helpful for me. I can say trauma is all gone because trauma comes for different reasons, but I know that I can always talk to people when I need it, and that's been very helpful. So yeah, and I always like advise anybody, especially new immigrant coming to a place. It's scary. it's lonely. Even New Year Day, this called New Year, they were like doing like fireworks, and I went to my window. I just like, oh my God, if this was like Liberia, I was gonna be with my family and we'll be looking at the fireworks, right? But but it's also like I had to like call my mom and like, I'm so sad, I miss you.
Oh.
And so we had conversations. But also it's the good thing it's knowing that there's a purpose and knowing that there are a lot of people who watch me grow and become an example to some of them. And now have my little sister who also graduated college. So just basically breaking that generational line has been very helpful to me. And it gives me a lot of hope.
Well, you give me a lot of hope, Fatu. I think I might have to coin you Liberia's Malala, or at least Canada's Malala. You are not just a peace activist, storyteller, author, and entrepreneur. You're an incredibly cool human being, and it's a
Yeah.
privilege to have you in at least my country, our country, Canada, as someone who's doing such good and purposeful work for so many. So thank you. Where can people find out more about the great Fatu Kaba?
Well, I have a website. Once you put in Google Fatu Kaba, you'll find my website. You'll find my Instagram, my LinkedIn. Um, I have TikTok. I have Facebook. Yeah, so I'm literally on all the social media platforms. You could basically check. And once you go to my website, you'll see like a place to contact me, or you can just like send me a DM on LinkedIn.
There you go. Okay. Well, thank you for this. Can't wait. Eventually, I hope to meet you in person. You heard it here
Me
first,
too.
folks. Canada and Liberia's Malala. That's Fatu M. Kaba. She's an incredible Liberian peace activist. She's an entrepreneur, and look out, world. She's got something coming for you. Thank you, Fatu. We'll see you again. And for those listening or watching, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Leadership Now.